So this is the Sony Bravia XR A80L OLED TV, and probably one of Sony's most popular OLED TVs being bought this year. It's also direct competition to the LG C3 and sits in the upper mid-range of Sony's lineup. But the big question, is it worth buying? Well, let's find out. Well, the first thing you need to do is decide what room you plan on placing your TV in. If it's in a dark room, then the A80L is a TV you might want to consider. However, if your TV room has a lot of natural light, I'd look at a mini LED TV since it can get significantly brighter. Now, if your heart is set on the A80L, it's not a massive update compared to last year's model. In fact, just like the A80K, it's mostly made of plastic, but it does have metal feet that can be adjusted to 3 different heights. Now, this is great in case you have a sound bar and don't want it to block the TV, but my suggestion is to keep the TV as low as possible for a cleaner look if you don't plan on using one. The overall build quality feels super solid and there's very little wobble. It's quite thin, around 2 inches at its max thickness, and the front bezels are quite small. The back of the TV has a plastic removable cover in order to access the I/O. The cover helps manage your cables, or at least hide parts of them, so they're not dangling all over the place. Underneath the TV hiding away is a single button to turn the TV on or off, change the volume, and a switch to disable the microphone. On the back, there's 2 USB ports, optical digital out, S center speaker in, 4 HDMI ports, 2 of them are HDMI 2.1. There's an Ethernet port, RS232C remote port, IR in, and your cable antenna connection. The port selection is quite nice, but I would have loved to have an additional HDMI 2.1 port because my Sony HT-A7000 soundbar uses one of them since it's combined with eARC, and the PS5 occupies the other one. This forces me to connect my Xbox to a regular HDMI port capped at 60 Hz. Now, for most people, this is probably not the biggest deal, but if you're rocking more than one console, unless it's a Nintendo Switch, it could have you thinking about a different TV. The controller is not different from my Sony A95K TV that I made a video on last year. The only difference is they added 2 more shortcut buttons, one for Bravia Core and the other for Crunchyroll. What I think would be cool is if they added some extra buttons that you could create your own shortcuts for instead of using the ones that are included, because let's be honest, you might not be using all those streaming services. The overall controller experience feels great, it's responsive, and just like the A80K, it uses Google TV, which I personally prefer over LG's and Samsung's interface. There's more apps to choose from, and it integrates with your Google account for a more seamless experience across all your devices. The processor inside is snappy, which made moving around the menus quite smooth, and there's a Chromecast built in so you can cast content from your phone. Now, I always suggest purchasing a soundbar at the very least for a better audio experience, but the speakers built in the A80L are decent. Sony uses a feature called Acoustic Surface Audio Plus that uses woofers and speakers to vibrate the actual screen to create sound. Now, it does work quite well and does feel like there is some separation, but please, if you have the budget, get a proper home theater setup. It takes the movie experience to a completely different level. Speaking of a completely different level is Sony's upscaling, or more specifically their image processing. There were so many times I'd be watching 1080p or even 720p content thinking I was actually watching 4K. Plus, their XR Clear image technology significantly improves the clarity and sharpness of the already amazing looking 4K HDR content that's on the screen. Now, I've seen the LG C3 and I have an LG C2, and they have gotten much better. But Sony is still the king of image processing, and the main reason why you'd pick a Sony TV over the competition. Now, unfortunately, the peak brightness is not as high as the LG C3, but it's slightly better than last year's A80K. It's not bright enough to place in a bright room, but perfect for a darker space like I have here in my basement. For example, I have a Sony X95K mini LED TV upstairs in a room that has much more sunlight, but the thing is, it can double the peak brightness to compensate. I've watched quite a few movies and played tons of games on this TV, and everything looks incredible. I've even tried Sony's Bravia core streaming service since it offers higher bit rates, and the content ended up looking even cleaner than most other competing streaming services. Now, there are so many different picture profiles to choose from, so your taste will be different than mine. But the one thing I will say is, for the best experience, please turn off any sort of power saving or eco-based features. I'm all for the environment, but it does ruin the experience. These options tend to lower the amount of overall brightness, which is something regular OLED TVs already struggle with. But the one area that the A80L did get an improvement is in its gaming features. There's now a new gaming menu, and when you press the menu button, you'll get access to all the gaming settings like variable refresh rate, motion blur reduction, which only works if you have VRR disabled, black equalizer, which helps you see in darker scenes, and a crosshair function that can help you with your aim. But I did notice that the HDR brightness seemed to be a bit lower in game mode compared to normal HDR modes like when watching content. I will say though, gaming on this still feels great because the response time is one of the best I've seen on a TV. Now, I don't have a calibration tool to measure this and give you a scientific explanation, but I do have a lot of gaming experience with gaming monitors to know what a very low response time feels like. So the big question, should you buy it, skip it, or shortlist it? Well, look, I do wish it had more 2.1 HDMI ports and better consistency with the overall screen brightness in HDR modes, but the image processing is still the best in the business. I think for most people, it's gonna come down to price. Like right now, the 65-inch A80L is $2,000 US, which is the exact same price as the LG C3 OLED. But personally, I'd rather have better image processing over a bit more brightness and a few more gaming features. But of course, everyone is going to feel different. Now, if you have an A80K, there's nothing to get jealous about. You've spent good money on your TV and it's gonna last years for come because this update is more of an iterative one. But yes, I definitely put this on my buy list as long as the price remains competitive. Anyways, that wraps up my review of the Sony A80L. If you have any questions, let me know in the comment section down below. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one.